Hello, and welcome to the Spoonie Authors Podcast, a podcast where we explore a different disabled author's stories each week. I am your host, Diana Gunn, and our guest today is MA Hinkle, a contemporary romance novelist and author of the Cherrywood Grove series. Her most recent book, Weight of Living, was released just this past Monday. Hello, MA.
Hello, how are you?
I am great, actually. I just finished a huge writing project, so very excited, and I'm very excited to finally chat with you. How are you?
I'm great. I actually just wrapped up my revisions on another book, so things are speeding
Amazing.
right along.
So, congratulations on finishing those revisions, and congratulations on the release of Weight of Living. Can you tell us more about this book?
Well, it's set in the Cherrywood Grove universe, which is a contemporary romance series where everyone is queer. You don't have to have read the first two books, but characters from it do appear in this one. And this one is a story about Trisha, who is a photographer who's just in town for the summer, but she keeps running into this cute chef at weddings and maybe kind of gets a huge crush on her, which would be really super inconvenient. And then more things happen. I'm bad at pitches.
And why exactly is the crush on this lady inconvenient? Is it because she's only in the town temporarily, or is it a
Yeah,
secret?
she's actually from Chicago, so she's a big city girl coming to this small town and then being like, "Oh no, I love it here. I don't know if I want to stay or not, or if it's just because I've got googly eyes for this cute lady."
That can definitely complicate things. A very attractive person can make a place more attractive, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So you wrote Weight of Living during your first MCS flair. Can you talk a little bit about what MCS is to introduce our listeners to it? I almost said readers.
I mean, hopefully you're doing transcripts for this, so who knows?
We
Um,
absolutely are doing transcripts, actually. And hopefully we will have closed captions as well if I can get things to cooperate.
oh yes, accessibility. Um,
But yes, tell us about MCAS.
yes. Okay. So basically, the way I usually explain it to people, even though it's not strictly accurate, is it's like super allergies. Um, I'm really sensitive to things like dust and pollen and stuff like that. And uh, the symptoms look like ordinary allergies that should just be treatable with like antihistamines and things like that. But it's not the same system in your body. So, I went through this whole thing where I was trying to get allergy testing and like do desensitization treatment and all that good stuff, and none of it was working. And I just kept getting sicker and sicker until I found out, no, actually, it works completely differently, and I need to do different things to take care of it. So, yeah, it's basically fancy allergies, but worse.
That sounds pretty brutal. And the confusion sounds like the worst possible thing. Trying to do all these things that are supposed to help you, but nothing helps because you're on the completely wrong road to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did this impact your writing process?
It was really difficult because what happened to me is I was, I was sleeping in the attic of my house, basically, which was super dusty, and I was sleeping on a really old bed, which was full of like, dust mites and nasty bed things. So every time I would lay down to go to sleep, I was like tucked right up underneath the ceiling on top of this old musty bed, and I would start having reactions really bad, and I couldn't get any rest. So for like about 6 months out of the year, for the past 2 years, I was just not sleeping, which obviously made it really hard to sit down and get some work done. And it was really difficult to deal with because I had just come off writing my second book, which I wrote before my symptoms started, and that one was a dream to work on. And then I was sitting down and I'm like, okay, I like these characters, I know how this world works, I know what comes next. cannot sit down to work and concentrate. And I basically had to make a choice between using my limited resources on work that would pay me immediately or writing. And obviously I had to pick the work that would actually put money in the bank account right away. But then when that happens, you get depressed. And as it turns out, stress and anxiety can be triggers for MCAS as well, because it basically your body freaks out so much that it just explodes. Like there's technical explanations for all this, but that's what happens. It just all gets worse. And so until I figured out what was actually going on, I didn't know how to treat any of it, and I just was not getting any work done. So I wrote this book over the course of like a year, but working on it was just hell, basically, because I was just sitting there beating myself up for not being able to concentrate and not being able to produce as much as I was used to. And I really didn't get anywhere until I realized, like, no, I'm sick and I need to, like, seriously downgrade my expectations of what I can get done. Pretty much.
Yeah. And that's such a hard thing to do when you are used to producing a certain amount, and also just in our culture right now. Like, even for people who just have day jobs, it's totally normalized that, you know, the good workers works 40 hours a week and then does some extra stuff. And not being able to meet that standard is really hard on the ego.
And that's how I've been my whole life. Is I've always been a person who I don't like to have writing is the only thing that I'm doing, and that doesn't work well for me. So having to be like, no, I can either work or write, and sometimes I do have to prioritize the writing or I'm going to lose my mind, was a really hard decision for me. And like understanding how that all worked was super tricky.
Yeah. So we've talked so far mostly about the struggles of writing this book, but Weight of Living is an awesome project. So I wanted to ask, what was the most exciting part of writing this book? And yes, you are allowed to say finishing it.
Well, God, finishing it was horrible because I thought I started writing what I thought was going to be the ending like 4 times, and then it just did not work. And I was like, nope, got to rip the whole thing out and start over. So no, finishing it was also bad. It's been rough, but what was good about working on this book and what kept me coming back to it, even though I was frustrated, was my first 2 books are about boys, which was nice. Those were books that I wrote like as like nice little comfort security blankets when I was really depressed before I got sick, but I was just sad. And they were really nice to write because it was like, here's a happy little fantasy about, you know, 2 boys falling in love. And then Weight of Living is about 2 women, and the main character, Trisha, is trans. And it was just basically, this is also a fantasy of, you know, a trans person gets to come to a town like the one that I live in, and everyone loves her and treats her really nicely, and she meets a beautiful woman who is basically the girl of her dreams and just gets to have a real nice time. So it was fun to do something that was a little bit more closer to my experience. And then also just the other big thing in this book is that the love interest, Gabby, is not out to any of her family about being gay because she only realizes it right before her father dies. Spoilers, I guess. I don't know. Technically, you don't find that out until the end of the book, but it's really obvious. It's a lesbian romance. Like, obviously, she's gay. But her experience of not realizing that the feelings that she had for women were more than friendship is something that was really true to my life. So digging into that and writing about her, like slowly realizing what was going on in her head the whole time was really personal. And those parts really came from my own experience.
That's awesome. Did you find that it also helped you process those experiences? Or that it was cathartic in some ways?
Yeah, it really was. It was, you know, like I said, writing about guys, there's a sense of removal because I I'm not a guy, so like it's kind of easier just like do like do this is just fun and happy. But writing about women and kind of digging into my experiences, you know, I'm non-binary, not a woman, but like I grew up thinking I was a woman and like relating to having crushes on other women and being like not understanding what was going on. So writing about that specific experience where you're super close with your friends and realizing that the feelings that you have for them are different than the feelings they have for you is something that really took way longer than it should have for me to work out. So writing about that was really nice and fun to dig into.
Awesome. And it sounds like such a sweet story.
That's what I hope. Because like there's like technically, I guess there's some drama in this book because part of a subplot is about Gabby's niece going through a rough breakup and like trying to move on from that. But that is like the most drama that's in there. It's mostly just girls talking and like watching anime and having a good
time. I hear someone saying hello in the background.
I'm sorry. He's mad because I have the door shut, but if I come in here, he'll be even louder.
Oh.
Because the good boy is sitting in my room right now, being very quiet and not causing any problems. So if I let the baby in, he's going to come in here and bother the good boy, and they're going to fight. So sorry about that.
That's all right. That sounds pretty much exactly like my cat's dynamic. It's just that the troublemaker has already used up all of his trouble for the day and is now having a nice long nap.
Oh, I wish that he could use up his trouble, but he's like, I think he's like 2. So he's like in that horrible teenage cat phase where he's big enough to get into real trouble now, and he just won't stop. It's so terrible. He's just lucky he's so cute.
Yeah, our younger cat is 3 and also very lucky he's so cute. We have been through some things. Cats are excellent companions for disabled authors. I'm just going to throw that out there. I would love to have a dog, but unfortunately it's not realistic for me to take care of a big dog.
My parents have dogs, so like I can have them around, which is really nice. But it's like if I was living by myself, absolutely not. Because like there are days when I can get out of bed, but functioning beyond like sitting staring at my phone is not an option. So like cats are great because you just have to like make sure their food bowl is full.
Yeah, and they usually know when you're not feeling well, and they'll come to cuddle you. I mean, dogs do that too, but
well, the dogs that I have are like, yeah, well, my dogs are like 70 pounds apiece. So if they come to cuddle me, what they're actually doing is smothering me alive.
That still sounds pretty great to me, I've got to be honest. I will happily be smothered by your big-ass dogs. All right, so getting back to the topic, one of the biggest struggles of becoming disabled is that there isn't really good representation in a lot of places. There are a lot of misconceptions that people have, and a lot of it comes from the media we consume. So can you talk a bit about what you have seen in terms of representation in the media and what you would like to see in the next few years?
Well, the thing about my particular condition is that it's not like they're realizing that it's not rare, but it's not really out in the public consciousness yet, which is part of the problem because like a lot of people, the common story, like the way that I found out about this disease was from a person I follow on Tumblr who basically spent her whole life being told, you're just nuts. Like there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to take some antidepressants or stop lying. And it turned out, no, actually, she was having like minor anaphylactic reactions that just kept getting worse and worse until she almost died and finally found somebody. So in this particular case, it would be nice to have anything at all to like tell people that it exists and that maybe there's something else going on besides just ordinary allergies, or like, because I'm lucky in that mine isn't actually that bad, and that because I caught it so early, I can manage it with treatment fairly well. But a lot of people, they just keep getting worse and worse until they're reacting to basically anything. Like this person that I follow on Tumblr, her name is Joy Demora, the Bibliosphere on Tumblr. She's really great. She was down to the point where she could eat like 2 foods without triggering her allergies, and otherwise she was totally in danger of like dying. So having anyone talk about this at all would be great. But at the same time, you know, with disability representation, you run into the problem of like the miracle cure, where like you just concentrate hard enough and you try so hard and then you're fine. Or like, you know, you people are like, oh, it's all in your head. Like that's the big one. That is the real problem. You know, like you're just imagining what's wrong with you. You just need to try harder and like will whatever's wrong with you away. And that is so damaging, you know, because that's what I tried doing for so long until I finally admitted like, no, something is actually wrong with me. And if I hadn't snapped out of that mindset, I would have been a lot sicker than I am now, because I never would have actually treated my symptoms. And I think that a lot of people run into that situation where they just try so hard that they almost kill themselves. And once they're at the point of being basically too sick to do literally anything else, that's when they actually stop and get help because of that damaging narrative. That was a little bit rambly, but you get my idea.
I mean, there's a lot to cover. There's so much to discuss.
Like I have to admit, like until I started being, you know, more online, ableism was not a thing that was necessarily on my radar, just because it's so pervasive in our culture, you know. And before I got sick, like I was trying to really, you know, push it out of my language and like be more sensitive to the needs of people, but I didn't actually understand how bad it was until I had to seek out other people with MCAS to try and find like treatment for my disease, and like seeing people struggle with benefits or just like getting basic respect from other human beings. It's horrible, and it's all around us, but it can be so invisible unless something actually happens to you, which is the worst part, I think.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that a lot of it, I've said this in other interviews, I think that a lot of it is actually just ignorance because, you know, until I started really becoming part of disability communities online, I didn't, like, I had some idea because, you know, I have been mentally ill for most of my life. And so I know some stuff about the stigma there, but like, I hadn't really realized how ingrained other forms of ableism are in our culture. You know, tropes like the miracle cure and like the idea that the miracle cure is the only thing you ever want to is really toxic. The idea that you can't be happy living with your disability.
That one, like I personally would not complain about having a cure for MCAS just because there's like it'll just kill me if I'm not careful. But like things like people with limb differences or people who are paraplegic or what have you, like they just need adaptations in society. That's literally it. But we're so like unwilling to see that things could be different and actually better for everyone that we just prefer to let people suffer, and it's disgusting.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that in the media, a lot of people just aren't having this conversation yet, or they're having this conversation in extremely limited ways.
It's like I feel like not that I want to compare the two at all, but like my experience of finding out about disabled culture is a lot like how I found out about queer culture, because I live in a really rural area rural area. So I didn't have a lot of contact with either a lot of disabled people or a lot of queer people. So my experience of coming out as queer was like slowly finding that there's this whole gigantic conversation that's basically happening like in a parallel universe that I didn't know about until it was relevant to me. And it's the same thing with ableism, only it's way more obvious, and like there are people like screaming in plain sight and everyone just keeps walking. Like that's how it is. It's just awful.
Absolutely. Are there any stories that you have encountered that are handling disability representation well that you would like to give a shout out to?
Nothing relevant that I can think of to myself. Unfortunately, I really pondered about this question, but the problem is that so many bad things exist, and I don't. The thing that happened to me when I got really sick is I basically stopped consuming new media for a while, so I didn't have a chance to like look for things that were specifically called out for having positive disability because I just didn't have the brain power to like read a new book or watch a new show. But I do know, I don't know if it's already out yet, but there's a book I keep seeing on my Twitter feed called Sick Kids in Love that's supposed to be really good. I haven't personally read it, but
Sick Kids in Love has come out. I haven't read it yet either, but I have heard so much shouting and enthusiastic internet screaming about it. So I'm very excited to check that one out as well. I don't usually read that kind of thing, but I've just heard so many glowing recommendations for it from people I really trust that I'm probably going to end up picking up a copy of that as well.
Oh gosh. Okay, I thought of one more. So the other book that I have heard of is called Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. And she's a delightful person on Twitter. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I've heard great things. And the main character is dealing with an invisible disability, and it's supposed to be handled amazingly. I know I read an article the author wrote about dealing with chronic pain that was just mind-blowingly good. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's on my list to read like ASAP.
Awesome. That all sounds very exciting. And I hope that as things go on, we will be able to talk about more and more disabled stories that are being released into the world. I hope this is that these two books coming out is the beginning of a large and prosperous trend.
I don't mean to sound so pessimistic about everything. I really do think things are getting better. It's just that, you know, the moment is still building. I think is what it is. Because publishing is always about like 10 years behind what's happening in the real world. And so is the rest of media. So I think as disabled people start yelling louder and people actually start paying attention to them, publishing will finally catch up and we'll see more like actual good representation. Because clearly people have like an appetite for stories about people being sick because we have so many of them. We just need to see them actually written by people who are themselves sick and can talk about what it's actually like instead of weirdness.
Yeah, instead of romanticizing it or turning it into, basically suffering porn. Or inspiration porn, yeah. I do think there is still a place for abled people to write stories about disabled characters, but I think absolutely what we need is more disabled people writing their authentic experiences, because if we don't have that, how are abled people even supposed to have something to work with? How are they even supposed to have research to go by?
Or how are supposedly able people able to see that, no, wait, maybe there is something wrong with me and I'm just ignoring a bunch of stuff that should be like blinking red lights saying, danger, danger, Will Robinson. That's kind of what happened to me.
Yeah, that too. That's huge, especially for, women and marginalized folks who are just generally not believed in medical establishments anyway. It's so horrifying. Most disabled people I know, but every single disabled woman I know has at least one story of being told by a doctor that she was flat out lying about her illness.
Yeah. Oh boy. Oh gosh. Like I think like after I realized what was actually wrong with me, which was about 6 months after I initially started having symptoms, I went through all the medication that I had cycled through trying to get treatment for my quote unquote anxiety, because none of my doctors questioned when I said, I think I had a panic attack, even though I've had anxiety my whole life and I've never had these symptoms before, and it just came out of nowhere. Like, no one stopped to ask, maybe there's a physiological symptom at work here, even though, like, if you start having panic attacks out of nowhere and you've ever had allergies in your life, that could be an anaphylactic reaction. Like, that is a recognized symptom of your body going into shock. So probably get that looked at. Just saying.
Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to fight really, really hard to actually get our doctors to acknowledge that. I would like to think that more media representation would also change that, but honestly, I don't know how much doctors get out of their little doctor bubble. All right, so it has been lovely chatting with you, but I think it is time for us to wrap up. So tell us where people can find out more about you and where they can grab a copy of The Weight of Living.
Well, The Weight of Living is now live on basically all major book retailers. If you pre-order it through my publisher, 9 Star Press, which is ebook only, you can actually get a copy of the book 3 days early, so you can read it on Valentine's Day. The main place to find me is usually on Twitter, where I'm at SkySongMA, but I do also have a Facebook page, and my website has links to all my books and stuff that you put on the website. It's just my name, MaryAnnHinkle.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been lovely to chat, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spoonie Authors Podcast. The Spoonie Authors Podcast is part of the Spoonie Authors Network, a community initiative devoted to sharing the stories of disabled authors and educating abled people about what life is like for disabled creatives. Transcripts of this podcast are also available on the Spoonie Authors Network. To learn more or become a contributor, visit spoonieauthorsnetwork.blog. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming platform.